Esquire columnist John Berendt went to Savannah, Georgia for a weekend, and he became so captivated by the city's character that he moved there. He found murder, sex, and madness amidst the magnolias, and he wrote what the New York Times called the first true crime book that makes the reader want to call a travel agent and book a bed and breakfast for an extended weekend. It is called Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. It is climbing the bestseller list, and it is getting rave reviews, and we're pleased to have the author here this evening. Welcome.
Nice to be here.
Tell me the story, because you, who have been a journalist with New York Magazine, columnist with Esquire, all of a sudden, this is, I guess, many journalists' dream, is to write this kind of book and get this kind of reception. And it's almost as if it didn't start by design. You didn't go to Savannah looking for a story.
No, and I wasn't there to write a book.
Right.
I stumbled on it. The airfares tumbled in the beginning of the 1980s, and it made more sense to take flights out of town for a long weekend than to buy this fancy food that you get in Nouvelle Cuisine and restaurants. So that's what a bunch of us did every once in a while. One of the trips I made was to Charleston, and my friends went back on Sunday, but I noticed on the map that Savannah was only 2 hours south by car. I'd always heard about Savannah. I'd never seen it. I'd read Treasure Island when I was 10 years old, and the map of Treasure Island is handed over, if you recall, at Savannah. Captain Flint gives it to Billy Bones at Savannah, and I always thought of Savannah as a pirate's rendezvous, because it's also written on the map that Robert Louis Stevenson drew for all those editions of the book. Later, when I read Gone with the Wind, it was not the center of the action, but it was off on the coast, and Margaret Mitchell describes it as an ancient grandmother fanning herself in the shade. This is Savannah as opposed to Atlanta, which was then a frontier town. So that's all I knew about Savannah. And I don't think many people do know a lot about Savannah. So I took a look, and I drove there, and I was absolutely captivated, enchanted, and seduced by the city. It's a city.
What was it about the city that captivated, fascinated, seduced?
The physical environment, for one thing. It's a city of garden squares. The streets are laid out in a grid pattern with squares at every other intersection. Each one has Spanish moss and live oak trees and flowering shrubs. The town is very well preserved. It's a 19th century town with beautiful architecture. The weather, as you probably know, is very mild and soft and gentle. And the light is gentle because it filters through the live oak trees, which have very tiny leaves, and it filters rather than it blocks. The shade is not dark, it's sort of soft. And there's an atmosphere, there's a hush in town, there's very little noise at all, very little happening. And so there's this sort of hothouse atmosphere. And the people are charming, and I discovered, the longer I was there, I discovered more and more interesting people and characters.
And so what did you do, though, after discovering the city and finding out you liked it? You did what?
I went back to New York.
Yeah.
And then I thought about it. And it came time in my career to do something a little more than magazine writing, because I found it rather superficial. I was doing columns for Esquire, and I would study something for about a week or two and write about it, and then something else, and articles were. For me, I didn't get deeply into anything. And I began to think I wanted to write a book, and I thought, well, perhaps Savannah is meat enough for a book, because it was this wonderful, self-contained society. They don't care about the other outside world. And I went back, and the book happened. It sort of came together. It didn't come together.
I went back to live.
I went back to live, and it took about 7 years to write the book.
Yeah, and you got to know the place, and you got to know the people.
Right.
And so how did Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil come about? Who did you know, and what did you know, and what
began
led
to
to
meet
this
people. I knew that
story of murder and seduction and sex?
Yeah. I knew there was a story there, and a certain murder that happened in the most beautiful house in Savannah. Very intriguing kind of murder. The man who was accused of murder openly admitted that he shot this young man in his house, but whether it was self-defense or murder was the big question. But the man who was the defendant, Jim Williams, lived in Mercer House, a house built by the songwriter Johnny Mercer's great-grandfather during the Civil War. And it's the most beautiful house in Savannah, still in private hands. And Jim Williams, every Christmas, had the party of the year that all the members of society hoped to be invited to. So he was a sort of central figure in society. So for him to shoot somebody in a house that had already been photographed and published in Architectural Digest and was a center of the social life, was kind of a shock. And I realized that I could do a portrait of Savannah seen through this murder and how the town reacted to it.
It causes some critics to say this is really two books in one. On the one hand, it's almost a travelogue. It is a setting of a city, a romantic city in time and place, and on the other hand, it is a story of a murder.
Right. It's many things. In fact, it's one of the big challenges for Random House was that it's not any one genre. It's not a novel, but I've written it in the form of a novel.
Right.
It's not a travelogue where there's plenty of travel.
But there's an
writing
enormous sense of eye for detail in this city.
And there's a sense of place.
Yeah.
It's not strictly a true crime book, but there's a true crime reported in it. Yeah. It's not a memoir, but it is a memoir. So what is it? It's all these things. It's what I felt like writing and pulling together. And my only intention was to be entertaining from beginning to end. And the form it sort of came about on its own.
Tell me about the characters.
Well, I'll
like
tell
the
you,
dead man.
Well, the dead man. There are several. The man who got shot was a redneck hustler.
Right. Male hustler.
Male hustler. Right. Danny Hansford. The man who shot him, Jim Williams, was a fascinating character. He now is dead too. He died of natural causes, but he made his own fortune. He was an antique dealer and a great wit. Marvelous, strange person, slightly evil looking, but marvelous. There was, in the book also, there's a man who walks an invisible dog. There's a man who has a bottle of poison strong enough to kill everybody in Savannah if he dumps it into the water supply. And for fun, he glues threads to the backs of flies and walks them. As one would walk a dog, he walks flies. There is a black drag queen named the Lady Chablis, who's one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life, a true comedienne. A voodoo priestess who goes to the graveyard to put a hex on the district attorney for Jim Williams. He hires her to do this, and I accompanied them one time into a graveyard when this went on.
Yeah, you had total access to the people that to help you tell your story?
Yes, I did.
How did you develop that confidence?
Well, I'll tell you something. People know that Savannah is a closed society, but they're open to strangers. They are. I mean, if I had wanted to be a member of the Oglethorpe Club, that I could forget it. But
no way.
Exactly. As a guest in town, they're most hospitable, and as you know,
you could be taken to the Oglethorpe Club.
That's right, and I was. But being a member, no. But they're most hospitable, and the one thing Southerners love to do is talk.
Right.
And I said I was writing a book. I would call someone up out of the blue. I said, I've heard about you from so-and-so. I'm writing a book about Savannah. I was always very open about it.
These are stories beyond the murder itself.
Yes.
The characters that you're going to put in the...
Yes, it's a real panoramic view, but it all sort of ties in. And if I said I was writing a book and I wanted to meet them, and the response almost invariably was, well, come for cocktails. Make it at 4 o'clock. We can get started early, start drinking early, start talking
Now, are you
early.
Taking notes all the time?
Yes.
And does that inhibit them at all? Or
no, because when we get to the really choice spots, I put the notebook down and pretend I'm not taking it in. When somebody's really confessing something, you don't scribble madly. You calmly listen and then later write it down while they're not watching. But I always had my pen and pad out, so that I was never trying to put one over on the subject.
Now, do you feel lucky that all this was just? Let's give you credit for the gifts you have as a writer. Do you feel lucky that this story just fell there? I mean, this story that provides the meat of this, your powers of observation to see and sense and feel and be able to write about the characters, to observe, the power of observation, but the story itself.
I was very lucky, but really, this is the main character of this book is Savannah. And my luck was in discovering Savannah, which has been described as the biggest secret in America, best kept secret in America. So I was lucky to find Savannah.
Why is it the best kept secret in America? Why hasn't it been discovered? Because everybody knows about Charleston, I guess.
That's right. And it hasn't really tried to sell itself. It's sort of, when Menotti wanted to move, have a Spoleto Festival in the United States, he went first to Savannah.
Yeah.
They were totally uninterested.
Giancarlo Menotti, right?
Right. They were totally uninterested. So, as you know, Charleston got it. And Prudential was looking for a headquarters. They went to Savannah. Savannah gave them no help at all, no encouragement, and they wound up in Jacksonville. Well, this is why Savannah likes things just the way they are, and that's what they do.
But in the end, you moved back.
I did.
Why?
Well, I was really there to write a book. Yeah. I really moved there to write a book. You
never had any sense of staying, although you feel some longing to go back.
And I do go back, and I love going back now because the book is out, and I must say the reaction of the people in Savannah has been very interesting. At first, they were bemused by the fact I was writing a book. Yeah. After 3 or 4 years, they didn't believe I was writing a book. January of '93, when they heard the book was going to be published by Random House, everybody panicked. What have I told him? Is it going to be in the book? It's about a murder. It's about strange people. How will we look? Will anyone want to come here? Then the book came out. And they see that it's a very sympathetic, if very quirky portrait of Savannah, but very sympathetic.
Nobody's angry or nobody's really...
1 or 2 or 3 people.
Feeling of what? That the way you described them is not them?
No.
You took liberties with
there's a
their
character,
indiscretions?
No, there's a character or two who come off not so well.
Yeah.
But it's a fair portrayal, and they're not too happy. And I can understand that, but they are in the small minority, as it turns out. Some people are a little shocked about the drag queen and things like that, but I think by and large...
One of your favorite characters?
One of my favorite characters certainly is Chablis, who's
Yeah.
the black drag queen. But I really fell in love with the city and all the characters, even ones I didn't admire all that much.
Now, have people who've read the book in terms of editors and your friends who have seen the early manuscripts since it's recently been published, anxious to go to Charleston and meet some of these people and say, please take me, and I want to meet Chablis?
It's an amazing... Well, I've heard from the Chamber of Commerce that they've never had so many tourists in Savannah as they do now. In fact, this girl on the cover...
Yeah, I'll hold it up, yes.
That's a statue in Bonaventure Cemetery where
I
three
want you to tell me about the
three of the
Bonaventure
chapters
Cemetery.
take place in
Right.
Bonaventure Cemetery. And a local photographer in Savannah took this picture for Random House, and I think it's a beautiful cover. But anyway, she now she's the subject of all these tour buses go, and they pull up, and they've been posing, and the family that owns the plot that this statue is in has removed it as of Friday.
Yeah.
And now it's gone. So, because they don't want all that. It's very Savannah for them to have done that.
Yeah.
Not a word, just they removed it.
Now, is Savannah, the whole case, because it's homosexuality and all these other things, does it, I mean, how do Savannahans feel about that?
They take that. They're pretty sophisticated people, and they take that in stride. After all, don't forget that Jim Williams, who was this social figure, was known to be a homosexual, and he was not flamboyant particularly, but they knew it, and they sort of they told me later that we prided ourselves on accepting a gay man as a social figure.
As an important figure in our community. And how about Danny Hansford?
Well, he wasn't known to anybody. This was this was a friend and a helper that Jim Williams employed from time to time. And I don't think Jim Williams took him around socially, but he was there at the house on occasion. And but he certainly wasn't part of Jim Williams' open social life. He was discreet. Let us put it that way.
Is there anything that you wanted to do you couldn't do?
No. I'm sorry I didn't get some characters in, but there wasn't room for more than I put in. Yeah. I'm sorry I didn't add some things, but I'm really basically pleased with it. It took me 7 years, and I kept fixing and changing and rewriting, so that I'm fairly content with the way it came out.
How does it feel to have written a book like this? I mean, after 7 years, and to see it received this way?
Well, it's every writer's dream.
And are you beginning to develop some fear as to whether you can duplicate this, whether you can do this again?
Yes, I'm terrified that I can't. So I'll have to do something very different the next time.
And what about who's going to, I'm sure the movie people have you already sold it to the movie people?
Yes.
Who bought it?
Arnold Stiefel has bought it, and he's a very lively producer. I know my book is in the right hands because when I talked to him once on the phone, I heard splashing noises, and I said, Arnold, are you in the bathtub? He said, of course.
And does he have some sense of who the characters might be, who we would like to cast?
Well, he's been discussing some. Tommy Lee Jones, perhaps, for Jim Williams. These are just names tossed around. Spalding Gray, perhaps, for the man who has the poison, the strange man with the poison.
Sounds good so far.
And I don't know.
And who is Lady Chablis?
Lady Chablis wants. Well, I did make the producer promise that anyone who was in the book for real could, and they wanted to be in the movie, they'd be screen tested. Chablis wants to be in the movie.
No kidding.
She said, if
no
I'm not,
kidding.
Yeah, she said, if I'm not in the movie, there won't be a movie.
And you better not come to Savannah again.
Right, but they'll all be screen tested if they want to be in the movie.
And do you have how much? What else did you extract in terms of your deal for the movie?
Money.
Other than points and all those kind of things.
Nothing really, except that they do want to do justice to the book, which I'm happy about. They want me to write the script, but I'm not so sure I want to spend more time writing the script on this book. I've spent enough time on it.
But have you made a final decision on that, or
no,
you're just leaning against it?
I'm leaning against it, but I might very well work on a treatment and then let them. I don't know. We're not sure.
A couple of things about Charleston. One, the graveyard.
The Savannah.
Yeah, well, Savannah. I'm sorry. What makes it interesting to you?
Bonaventure. Well, the Garden of Good and Evil is precisely the graveyard.
Yeah.
The voodoo priestess calls it the garden. And midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil comes from her expression about what dead time is. She said, you know what dead time is? It lasts 1 hour. Half an hour before midnight to half an hour after midnight. Half an hour before is for doing good. Half an hour after is for doing evil. So the Garden of Good and Evil is specifically the cemetery, and in Savannah it's Bonaventure Cemetery.
Where does the voodoo come from?
Well, the Low Country in South Carolina and coastal Georgia is full of voodoo. It comes from the West Indies and from Africa to the West Indies, and then slaves brought it, and it's still pretty much, it's pretty common, usually practiced by black people, for black people.
Yeah.
But Jim Williams, who was white, got into it. Not terribly seriously, but he liked the idea of mind control in people's mind, and people, this woman thinking in his behalf and in her mental powers, working on his case for him.
Yeah.
He was quite a fascinating man, and she was a wonderful voodoo priestess, too.
Lady Chablis went to a debutante ball?
Well, she crashed it.
Crashed it. I just want to.
I was invited. I got myself invited to the black debutante ball. I heard about it, and I went and I asked if I could go, and the people who ran it said by all means. And it's a beautiful thing. And they dance the minuet, and there's these couples that dancing the minuet is a very beautiful thing to watch. Well, Chablis, when I told Chablis I was going, this black drag queen, she said, "Well, take me as your date," and I couldn't have thought of that's a horrible idea. I mean, it was grotesque. I said, "Absolutely not."
Yes.
So what she did was
she said, "I'll go anyway."
She crashed.
Yeah.
And it was a very tense moment for me, but it was very funny actually too, and it's in the book.
Yeah. Do you think these characters are lifelong friends for you? Those
Yes,
that are
I
still
think-
alive.
I hope so.
And those that,
I hope so.
Yeah.
Well, except the ones who aren't happy, but the others, I hope so.
I'm out of time. Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, John Berendt. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure, and congratulations on the success of the book. Thank you for joining us. Thank Secretary of State Christopher Warren. Christopher, we look forward to seeing you tomorrow night from Charlotte, North Carolina. We'll talk basketball, the magic of the Final Four. See you then.